Welcome to Women Entrepreneurs Radio. I'm your host, Deborah Bailey. And when I started this show in 2008, I was on a mission to promote women-owned businesses and help women succeed by providing resources and valuable tips from other women and men, small business owners. In each interview, my guests speak openly about their triumphs, the scary times, and tough decisions they have to make along the way. Women Entrepreneurs Radio is about showing women how to harness their natural strengths to achieve success on their own terms. Did you know that you can find the Women Entrepreneurs Radio podcast on many podcast platforms, including Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Spotify, and YouTube also? If you listen on Apple Podcasts, please take a moment to share your feedback and a review. 5 stars is always great, because the more that you share your feedback, the easier it will be for the show to be found by more listeners. So I hope you'll take a moment to do that. And as well, you can stop by the blog, womenentrepreneursradio.com, and you can find extended bios of the show guests and articles and announcements of interest to women business owners. So please make sure you stop by the blog and also subscribe to the podcast on your favorite podcast platform. Oh, wait, before you go, you can also stop by dbaileycoach.com to find out more about my nonfiction books and about my online writing courses for fiction authors. And dbaileycoach.com/brightbooks is where you'll find my paranormal and fantasy romance novels. And now, let's get started with the show. So we are going to get started today with my guest. Renee Cohen is a financial strategist and advocate for the modern woman. Her passion for empowering women and natural talent for strategic analysis inspired her to follow her calling to help women be the boss of their money. So welcome to the show, Renee.
Thank you, Deb. I appreciate it. Excited to be here.
So, this is always a wonderful topic to talk about financials. And we're going to be discussing financial self-care and also 3 power money moves for women. So there's going to be a lot of great information here. But before we get started, could you just share a little bit about how you got started and what you're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think that it's a testament to, how our paths aren't linear. And I think even in a year that we've all been experiencing, no matter where you live, it just, pivoting and reinvention, seems to be the theme, especially this year. But, I started my career, I grew up in the New York area and was always a fanatical sports fan, and really, from childhood, always wanted to pursue a career in sports. I was not blessed with height in my, in my life. So knew that I'd probably be on the business side of sports, and really pursued that right out of school. And ultimately worked for a sports media network for almost 11 years. And, I hit that mid-management level where, early on in my career, I think you're always excited, just one, that you're fulfilling your dream. You don't really know what the working life is going to be. And as you're progressing into adulthood, I think other things become important to you. And as I really hit that mid-management level, I realized that, I was getting promotions and I was progressing, but I wasn't getting the financial component to it. And, part of it, I don't know if I was really able to wrap my head around. Was it a gender thing? Was it because I'm a woman? Would you do that to a man? All of those things. I don't know if I was really able to wrap my head around. All I knew is that I was, being overworked and getting these responsibilities that just looked good on paper. And yet I was living paycheck to paycheck. And really, how do I, be in the driver's seat of my own future, and really looking at my professional and my personal life, and making sure that I was in relationships that really served me, and that I wasn't in these relationships that I was just relying on money. So for me, that really started to focus a lot on what am I doing with my finances? Where am I getting that type of guidance? Because I didn't certainly have a ton of money and really didn't know where to turn to. And I didn't see in the financial service world how to get that guidance. So naturally, I just turned to some family, my dad and my parents, who were always pretty good with money, but they didn't really ever talk about, what they did with money. And I just kind of started talking to my girlfriends. We were, at the time I was just turned 30 and I was like really curious about what are they doing with their money? How are they feeling? And I just organically had these conversations. And the more that I did that, I realized that I had this passion to really educate women when it comes to money, because a lot of times, no matter even what I deemed as someone who's making good money or seemed like they arrived to a certain place, that we always felt like we were on a hamster wheel, and maybe the way that we make decisions is different than men. And I think that our relationship with money that we bring into our adulthood is different. And so as I started to unpack that more, I realized my passion was about helping women, and that is really how I developed and what I call is my calling. And it really was revealed to me more so than me, kind of realizing it myself.
So what would you say when it comes to your 3 power money moves? How would you describe those?
Well, I think first and foremost, it really is about making what feels like a very complicated topic, because our lives aren't linear. And so there's a lot of moving parts to our lives, and there's always things that we're trying to, juggle and balance. And so the topic of money and the world of money feels really complicated. So I always like to just try to simplify it. And then obviously within each of these moves, there's going to be strategies that best serve you relative to where you are in your life, your goals, your family structure, and all of the unique nature, things that about yourself. And as women, I think we have different priorities too. And that really is about, how do we have a balanced life? Spending that quality time with money, having that peace of mind while we also, strive for that financial independence. And some of the challenges that we face a little bit differently than men is that, and this certainly isn't a topic about the gender gap, but how, where we earn less than men, but yet we're living longer than men. And we also have a different relationship with risk. So, and I always hear that women I think we're kind of backed into a corner or title that women are risk conservative, when that's really not the case. I find that women are just more risk aware, and that we need to have the education and the information around something in order to make an informed decision. So really in line with helping to also uncover, what your current relationship with money is, to really then formulate that into 3 power moves that can again help to just simplify the process, and so it doesn't feel so overwhelming. And the first one is to be intentional with monthly cash flow. And I purposely do not call it budgeting, because I think the word budgeting really comes from a limiting belief. And so many of us really, quote unquote, fail at budgeting, because again, our lives aren't on a piece of paper, black and white. Now, within the month, we have certain expenses that are fixed by nature, whether that is mortgage, whether that is rent, and the things that, we have to pay for to operate our lives. But I think when it does come to the variable side of, our expenses, which is the lifestyle needs and the things that bring us joy, so many of us go off the rails in the fact that we confine ourselves to this budget. And then if we overspend by going to get that extra coffee a month, or going out for that extra dinner when we're actually able to do that in normal times, or go on that extra vacation, we just mentally get hijacked. So I don't like to use the word budgeting, because I think it comes from a very limiting belief. Using that word, monthly cash flow, it really allows us to come from an abundant perspective, and to really shift our mindset around that, and to shift ourselves into the CEO position of our financial life, and to really look at yourself as the visionary. And again, the CEO, and say, okay, I'm going to, as the CEO, really have awareness and intentionality around what's coming in the door and what's going out the door. And when you have that awareness and that intentionality, it helps you to really progress forward and to be able to make those decisions and accomplish goals and things that you want from a power perspective than coming from a limiting belief perspective.
Mm-hmm. And that's an interesting point you made about budgeting, and how, I guess, how that even sounds and what people think that means. It seems limiting.
It does. I mean, I can't remember a budget that I've ever stuck to, it's like, it just feels so limiting when you're like, I'm only going to spend $300 on this, in this category, where I like to think about the way to really create intentionality is an awareness. And first and foremost, I think that when we have a negative, or I don't want to say negative, but when it feels like a disabling relationship with money. And again, we all come to this relationship in our adulthood with some sort of baggage, and that typically is because of, either lessons that we learned along the way from the people around us growing up, or maybe the lessons and the conversation that we didn't have growing up. We just knew that money was this thing. And when you have a disabling relationship with something, then you're in the position to try to change that and to empower yourself. But to really create that intentionality is to really look at it, on a month-to-month perspective, is to think about your expenses in 3 categories. And that is your fixed expenses. So again, those are the things, if you want to just think about it as an operating budget, which I think helps to also eliminate the emotion out of what, of the process around it, is your mortgage, your rent, your car, if you have a car insurance, any insurances that are important to protect yourself, like all of these things that you have to pay for that, I always say is like things go crazy, which a year like 2020 certainly did, is that you want to make sure that, you still have to pay those things. So you think about your fixed expenses, then you think about your discretionary, which are your variable expenses, which is your lifestyle expenses. And every single one of us, there's going to be things that, and this is really where people get tripped up, is because there isn't any, every month isn't the same. So this is where we get mentally hijacked. And I know for myself, it's very hard for me to say, well, every month I'm going to spend $500 on dining out. Mm-hmm. That's not sustainable. So I always like to look at I categorize the variable expenses, and I tell people, like, my clients, like, let's just put it down in categories with no shame, no judgment. Where are you spending your dollars? And then look at those categories and let's divide out what are your negotiables and what are your non-negotiables, because we all value different things. So I may value different experiences versus material things, right? Someone may like to do something else, that whether that is getting a tangible item and shopping versus doing, going out with friends, whatever it may be. And I'm just literally using these as examples. Really look at what your non-negotiables are and what are your negotiables. Your negotiable things are the things that you can have and that you're like, that's nice to have. But if you didn't have it every month and then you're fine. That's where you can move that into the savings bucket, right? Is that you can kind of shave a little bit off the top and go put more into savings. And when you create that type of freedom and you think about your variable expenses and you're like, this is what I value and this is what I'm going to have, I want to incorporate this into my month to month expenses every month, then you could create a fun bucket. And so whether, obviously in the context of what, in what your resources are, it has to be within reason, right? That is not to give you permission to say, well, I'm going to spend every single dollar that I have, because you do have to think about the third category, which is saving. Mm-hmm. And savings in different ways, right? Not just cash savings, is making sure your money's growing for you. But when you give yourself that freedom to, instead of line item and trying to adhere to a certain budget, and just say, I'm going to give myself a fun bucket, money every month, and I have freedom to spend it however I want to. Maybe there's a month where, I am doing an extra weekend trip. And so therefore I'm spending that money that way, and I may eat out less one or two times less. It just gives you that freedom versus having to feel like every line item has to have a certain dollar amount to it.
That makes a lot of sense. And there's a lot of ways for people to track these things and all kinds of apps and whatnot. And are there any that you would recommend to make sure that people actually do keep up with that?
Yeah, I mean, I personally use Mint, and I encourage a lot. I've been using Mint for a very long time, so it's very hard for me personally to navigate away from it. Mm-hmm. But I know I have a lot of clients that like to use Know Your Budget, there's also there's an app called Digit that I know that's helpful for people. But I find that, Mint and Know Your Budget, which helps you categorize. Yes, there is some work on the front end to help, to kind of categorize, to put expenses into the right categories and things like that. But, those are the two apps that I find to be the most, have the most success.
Yes, I've heard of Mint, actually, and there's so many, and some of them seem to be more, difficult than others. And I think sometimes that can end up discouraging people who maybe are a little intimidated by money and counting money and making sure that.
Yeah. And I think that's where, and I fall into this trap myself. It's, it doesn't have to be perfect, right? And that's sometimes where we get paralyzed. Like if something isn't, if I'm not categorizing something in the right way, or if it's not it doesn't have to be to the penny, right? Like just even you have to know what's coming in the door every month. And so for us, for entrepreneurs, right, that's sometimes, the big thing that I guess from business women, from business owners is like, well, it's variable. Well, you still have some fixed expenses, and, you still have to know even if it's variable income on a month-to-month basis, you still know what your expenses are, right? So that's kind of where maybe the strategy and how to plan around variable income is a little bit different than W-2. But that, again, just because you have variable income doesn't mean that you don't have to necessarily have awareness, right? So, it is about categorizing and trying not to get caught up in being perfect about it. Mm-hmm. Because anytime we try to be perfect, it ends up paralyzing us, and then we just abandon it. Right, and maybe, and I know that for myself. I'm just like, when you put too much pressure on yourself for it to be perfect, you're just like, I just don't want to deal with this anymore. Again, it's a mental hijack.
Mm-hmm. That's true. That's really tough. And right now, particularly, what has happened this past year, especially with businesses and things that people probably never anticipated. I guess, are you finding a lot of clients and people you talk to in general really are having trouble managing their money?
I think it's twofold. There's obviously a lot of people and a lot of businesses that have been suffering, and, and I think thankfully, even if it's somewhat of a Band-Aid, a little Band-Aid, with Congress passing the stimulus package yesterday, and certainly we had some stimulus packages early on, at the beginning of this. Who knew that, 9 months later that we'd still be, this conversation, and we'd still be here. I mean, I think looking back, it's funny to think, like, oh, we're just going to be, we'll just get through this for the next 2 weeks and then life will go back to normal.
Right.
So, right. But yes, I mean, small businesses particularly have been hit really, really hard. And I think it just really shows the importance, and that's not to vilify anyone who's listening that wasn't prepared, because it's very hard to be, this came very unexpected, but the reality is that there's going to be more unexpected events that happen in your life. And hopefully it's never for another global pandemic. But this is what this lesson of this year has really taught us, is that there's unexpected events. And so the only thing that we can do is be prepared for some unexpected events. And especially as business owners, sometimes that's hard to just sit there, when you do have variable income, to just be sitting on cash and say, oh yeah, if I don't get if I don't get business for for 6 months, then, I can still survive. And that's just not the case. We've seen too many Americans, both on business owners and, as W-2 income, like just living too close to the edge, right? So the only lesson from this year is if you're finding yourself in that situation, is to take advantage of every option out there, right? Whether that is as a business owner, the new PPP loans that are coming out, making sure that you're connecting with the right lenders. And you don't have to be a big business, and you don't have to go through like a big bank, but, taking advantage of the resources, and all available resources that you could take advantage of. And then just focus on the recovery part of it, and where can you monetize your business and rebuild. And so when another unexpected event happens, maybe we're better prepared, right? And I think when we can kind of really put this behind us, it just, again, the lesson of this year just shows why it's important to plan.
That is really a great point, because it is also, as you were saying, about a global event. Yeah, it's not even just something, well, it's just in this area and people can kind of move to something else or shift what they're doing, but it's a entire world affected by these things and being changed by it, as well. I think the last time I was seeing something like this, I guess maybe, when the financial crash happened, where a lot of people, of course, lost money, but that's when I started to see a lot of people also think about business ownership, because they were losing jobs and they thought, well, I'll just do my own thing. But then there's challenges everywhere.
Yes, exactly. I mean, there's challenges everywhere. And I think the thing about this is very different than, the Great Recession of 2008, is that it was a financial crisis. And so the bailouts were happening on with the banks and, the foundation of our financial institutions, which I think, has also the reason why being in the financial service industry, I think, is a reason why there's a lot of lack of, trust and transparency, no matter how far away, you get from that. But this situation is obviously, there's a public health issue that was, wrapped around this, and it was global. So, and I think the benefit, even, as sometimes when we're living in it on a day-to-day basis and feeling the chaos of it, we're living in a country that obviously, it's not always going to be perfect, but we have the ability to put things in place to really help people. Is it going to be perfect and completely solve if someone's needs? No, because, just with the stimulus package yesterday, after people not being able to pay bills for like 6 or 7 months, is someone going to get $600 and be able to pay a bill? No. But, I think it's a Band-Aid, and I think it's just a matter of, really being able to take advantage, whether it's the unemployment, if you're in the corporate setting, as a business owner, taking advantage of, business loans that are accessible, to you, even if you're a sole proprietor, no matter how your business is structured, and taking advantage and just, looking at your core business. And that's a lot of conversations that I've had with a lot of my clients that are business owners that have been impacted by this is, let's look at your core businesses. Are there pieces that we can monetize in a different way? Can we pivot from online and, from in person to online and monetize it? And I think this is in a time where people do become more creative. Is it perfect? No. Is there going to be recovery? Absolutely. But when we can maybe feel like we're in control of it and just take one step at a time and not let the panic completely overwhelm us. And again, look for resources and to leverage our connections, right? Leverage what, our community of people. I really believe that we can get through this, and in a year, 2 years, and 3 years, we can be in a better position and prepare ourselves financially for any unexpected event. Again, hopefully it's never for another pandemic, but there's going to be something that happens. There's going to be another bump in the road, and that's why planning is really important.
Yes, it's true. And, you know, what you were saying about businesses and pivoting and particularly the online space has become even more important. Cause it's just kind of interesting hearing, so much, activity around Zoom. And I'm like, well, you know, I've been using Zoom for years. I'm sure a lot of other entrepreneurs have, but it was interesting to watch people kind of discover
Zoom. Like all of a sudden it's like, wait, this new thing called Zoom, you know? And I'm in the same boat. I've been using Zoom for a long time. And, you know, in the traditional, I have an office and I work with clients all over the country. And so I've been used to the flexibility of, doing things over, over Zoom. But even when I was doing that, a lot of times, a lot of other people were like, no, I just rather have a phone call. But now everyone's like, oh, there's this thing called Zoom. And I'm with you. It's like, how Zoom has become a household name. And how did we survive before we all Zoomed every single day?
It's true. It's very interesting how all of that started to shift because it had to. So, it's going to be interesting to see how all this works out as hopefully, we get this under control as far as the virus. And, I think a lot of, just like what happened with the financial, part in 2008, new technologies and things came out. And I think that's also going to happen now too, that, may, open up some opportunities for some business owners who right now aren't sure what's next, but there may be things, coming up that they will see, oh, okay, this is something that I can use. But, as far as investments, is that something that people should be doing right now, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's it's one of the number one questions. It's not one. There's only one number one question, but one of the top questions I should say that I'm getting is like, should I invest? Because as much as people are struggling right now, there are people that, that haven't been fully impacted, right? And that's not to take away in any shape or form that people that have been impacted. And frankly, some business owners too that have gotten money from, the small business loans and have, gotten that they're finding themselves like, well, I've pivoted my business. I've kind of like gotten over the shock of like what to do. And now I'm kind of in a groove and I'm making money. And whether you're finding yourself in that situation or really have had stability, and I think, have had stability this entire time. And again, that's, still feeling, the empathy for people that have struggled and have been impacted by this. We've had whiplash. I think that's another lesson of 2020, right? And in many levels, not just on the financial side, but maybe also in the political climate, there's been whiplash, right? It's like you feel like you've been beaten and bruised going back and forth and just like everything that's going on. And our financial markets have definitely been that, the bear market of the S&P 500 bear market in March. Was obviously a shock that none of us expected. And then I think right behind that is the recovery of the S&P 500, 5 months later. So it's still in the middle of a pandemic, that this is a good time to invest. And I think that when you have the ability, right, and it doesn't have to be a lot, but when you can start shifting some dollars out of cash and you're not in that, maybe the scarcity and the recovery mode, then shift some dollars into cash, because when you're investing those dollars, that really is about the power of compound growth. And that's really when the markets are down is when you're able to buy more shares of something, right? And whether that's individual stock or buy mutual funds. I'm more of a proponent of mutual funds, especially as you're building your financial investment portfolio, just because you can mitigate your risk and not just, as much as we all may love Zoom, today, do you want to put all of your eggs in the Zoom basket? But yeah, I mean, this is a good time to be investing. And I think it really is about, human nature, because of the fear factor around investing, is that we see a downturn or the chaos or the volatility. It means that we should not be investing when it's really, we should be.
That's a great point. So Renee, can you please share with the listeners where they can find you?
Yeah. They can find me on my Instagram, which is, ReneeLori. So it is my personal Instagram that I also, share some financial tips. And part of my goal for 2021 is to up level my social media strategy. So promise that there will be more on there, and also through email, which is my first name dot my last name, RENEE.COHEN at N as in Nancy, M as in Mary.com.
Wonderful. So what are some other, top questions that you feel, you usually get asked and that you really want to cover?
I think the investing thing is the number one thing, or is really the number one thing. And then where do I put money outside of cash? And so that really does dovetail into the investment piece. The other question I get is, okay, like, where do I put money? Like, okay, I understand, like, outside of cash, where do I put money? I know there's this thing called cash, and I know there's this thing called retirement that's going to happen at some point that I need to save for. But where should I put money for in between those in between, those two goalposts? And that really is about, again, what's important to you, where you are, your life phase, your family structure, and all of the uniqueness that you bring to the table. But theoretically, I always like to then categorize money into 4 main categories: short term, just cash; 0 to 2 years; midterm, which is your 3 to 7 year range, that's where investments and having some sort of investment vehicle that's not a retirement account, but like an investment vehicle, put money into that's conservative, not super aggressive, but not as aggressive as maybe a retirement account, but that 3 to 7 year range. And then to think about that 7+ to retirement, to retirement. And that's where different vehicles, like investment vehicles, can come into it and just be invested a little bit differently than maybe your midterm. And then the 4th bucket is retirement, which is where you find your traditional retirement accounts, your 401ks, your IRAs, whether you're working in the corporate setting or you're a business owner, and you may have different types of IRAs. And if you're unsure of what kind of retirement accounts that you can have as a business owner, there are definitely certain types. It's called a SEP IRA. You can have a solo 401k. So there's definitely opportunity to save for a retirement account. And why those accounts are valuable is because you're getting tax preferential treatment. You can get tax deduction, it's tax deductible dollars, tax deferred growth, but you need to make sure that you're not just putting all of your money for retirement into just those vehicles, because otherwise you're going to have a not so nice, I should say, surprise when Uncle Sam comes knocking on your door in retirement, because since you haven't paid taxes all these years, you're going to need to pay taxes later. So that's really another question. And then the third question, which actually is the next question I always get a lot, especially in a year like this year, which is also the third power move, is how do I protect myself and my family? If this, again, another lesson of 2020 was that we may, as people were losing jobs, and in our country, our healthcare, our life insurance, our disability insurance, the ways that we could protect our family is all sometimes wrapped around our corporate benefits. And when we lose a job, we realize that we lost all of that as well. So that's where really making sure that you are protecting yourself, your family, from any sort of risk that you're unwilling to participate in, making sure your income is protected, making sure your health is protected, making sure that, especially as a parent, or as partners that are raising children, or partners that are financially relying on each other, that you have life insurance, and that you have the right amount of coverage, and then you have the right types of plan. That's not just thinking about your employer benefits, because your employer benefits will never fully cover you.
This is a lot of really good information across the board that we really need to know, particularly now, and hopefully we can get everything together. And definitely from a financial point of view, this is information that we all can benefit from, Renee. So this has just been great, and I'm really glad that you could come and share this with us. So before we wrap up, do you have any final thoughts that you'd like to share?
Yeah, well, I appreciate the opportunity to talk to your listeners. This is always valuable conversation that I obviously am very passionate about, and always want, especially women, to feel like you don't have to be perfect in no matter where you are in your financial life, and especially after a year that we've experienced, even if there's some sort of guilt, shame, or feeling like you're in recovery mode, no matter where you are today, tomorrow can bring even a brighter day. And especially in the financial side, it really is about being the visionary of your life, and you have the ability to really craft your future. And by just starting today with one move and not having to feel like you have to solve everything, it really in your financial life is about the small little steps you take today leads to really big, impactful steps down the road.
That's perfect. And good to know.
Yes, don't be perfect. It's progress, it's progress over perfection. And I say that because, I don't want to even say recovering perfectionist, because it creeps in a lot, my perfectionism. It really is about, giving yourself grace for where you are today, but really pushing through the discomfort of being uncomfortable and being that visionary, and growth, where growth happens is by being uncomfortable, and just knowing that just taking one or two steps leads you to a better scenario down the road, and not trying to say, I'll wait until, because I hear that a lot from women, is I'll wait till I arrive here to finally get, to do something. And, doing it yesterday is always better than tomorrow.
And that's true. People are waiting because they think, I don't have all the information, or just a fear of, as you were saying, making a mistake and not being perfect. But this is definitely something that we can't try to be perfect in, because I don't think there's any perfect, as you've been telling us, way to do this. You just have to make that start.
Exactly. And, the journey isn't always going to be perfect. My journey, I'm still living my journey, right? My journey, I've made mistakes, and I have, I've also had some successes. And I think it really is about just showing up for yourself and giving yourself that grace, and not feeling like it has to be perfect. And I think the more that we can talk about that and be vulnerable with each other, especially for us women, the more that we feel confident around, taking those steps.
So, once again, Renee, I want to thank you so much for coming on and sharing your expertise with us. It's been a wonderful conversation.
Absolutely. Well, thanks, Deb. I really appreciate the opportunity, and to be able a chance to connect with your listeners.
Everyone, I know you enjoyed this. Please make sure that you share this on social media, share it with your friends, and also contact Renee for more questions and get more information. It's again from Women Entrepreneurs Radio with your host, Deborah Bailey. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you again next time. Bye. Thanks for joining us. Don't forget to stop by womenentrepreneursradio.com to read extended bios of the show guests, and also find links there for their websites and any offers that they have shared with you. And stop by our Facebook page, facebook.com/womenentrepreneurs.